Rabbi Aaron Box from Temple Beth Shalom in Ocala, Florida, back once again with my podcast for this week. Last week I was in Chicago, Illinois for the Central Conference of American Rabbis annual conference. And just prior to that, actually about 6 to 8 hours before the convention actually began, I attended the first meeting of the Brickner rabbinic cohort. And the rabbinic cohort, the Brickner rabbinic cohort this year is all about trying to figure out a way to what it means to explore being a progressive, liberal, or reform Zionist in this world. And we tackled a lot of things in our day session, but really, what the aim or the goal of our cohort throughout the year, because this will go on for the next 8 to 10 months, is really to help ourselves and each other and other clergy as well as members of our community to really understand the struggle of being a progressive, a liberal, a reformed Jew, an American Jew, and also being a Zionist at the same time, especially with the difficulties that we have present, and not only in the world community, but specifically in Israel right now. And so, when we talked about building the cohort, we were given two main ideas. One, the entire world is a narrow bridge. The fellowship that we're creating in this cohort is for those who find themselves walking the narrow bridge between their communities to social justice, the commitments, to social justice and Zionism. What does it mean to be committed to social justice while at the same time being a committed Zionist? And one of the main things that people are afraid of is understanding that Zionism and social justice are really two sides of the same coin. That it's possible to live out your values of social justice while at the same time living out your values as a Zionist. And so we began to look at texts in the Jewish world. Some sacred texts, some modern texts. Obviously, all of them are important, but not all of them were biblical or from the Talmud. But a lot of them were really, well, they were all important texts for us to study. And so I want to begin with the text it's from the Bible, but it causes us to perhaps look at it from a very different angle than when we would think about it originally. So the verse in Leviticus 19:18, Lo tikom velo titor et b'nei amecha, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, ani Adonai. So do not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen or your fellow Jews, or the people that are in your neighborhood, in your land. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and you shall love l'reacha, your fellow or your neighbor, kamocha. We translate that as you love yourself, and then ani Adonai, I am Adonai. We translate that as love your fellow as you love or love your neighbor as you love yourself. But if you look at the Hebrew of kamocha, kamo literally means like or as, and cha is you. So kamocha, love your fellow like you. Love your fellow or love your neighbor who is like you. And we were shown a picture of a bus in Israel that has ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and underneath it gam im hu lo kamocha. Underneath it, also those who are not like you, or also if they are not like you. And it's interesting to think about what that means on a bus in Israel. Love your neighbor as yourself, or love your neighbor that is like you, but also your neighbors that are not like you. And this was on a very public place in Israel, traveling around, so that anybody who sees this bus will see this message. And it gives you a lot of thought. don't just love people because they are like you or love people who are like you. Love people who are not like you. That's a pretty strong statement. And I wanted to start there because obviously the Bible is the oldest of the Jewish texts, the ancient texts, our holy sacred texts. And yet we can translate it in a way that makes sense not just in the biblical scene but also or setting, but also in our current setting today. So that's one of the texts we looked at. We were studying some texts by Amos Oz, who is one of the greatest Jewish writers, Israeli writers to have ever lived. And the joke was told that he kept two pens on his desk, one that was blue in which he wrote angry op-eds to the newspaper, and one was for novels that was black. And in these particular texts, Jonah Pesner, who was in our training, he is the director of the Religious Action Center as well as a senior vice president of the URJ. He said, "I am a Zionist. For me, Zionism is the liberatory struggle, here the Jewish liberation, for Jews to live freely in their own land, as all people should be liberated. And this includes all people living in Israel who aren't Jewish." And I thought, wow, that's such an amazing statement to think about what it means. Zionism is not just about Jewish people living freely in their own land. It's for all people who live in the land of Zion to be free. That's a pretty bold statement, and yet one that I completely 100% agree with. And then another text that we look at was, there's a very famous quote from Deuteronomy 16:20 that goes, "V'yarashta et haaretz asher Adonai Elohecha notein lach." That's the ending, so that you may inherit the land Adonai your God has given you. But what's the line how does that line completely says, or what's the completeness of that line? Tzedek tzedek tirdof lema'an tihyeh ve'arashta et haaretz asher Adonai Elohecha notein lach. Justice, justice you shall pursue, so that you may live and inherit the land Adonai your God has given you. And the question of justice is tied to our possession of the land of Israel. The word lema'an literally means so that. So we are given preconditions. We have to have justice in our land, and then we get to have Israel, to live, to inherit the land, and to live well on the land. But if we don't have justice first, then we aren't allowed to be on the land. And that is another extremely important concept. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdov. Justice, justice you shall pursue, so that lema'an tihyeh ve'arashta et haaretz, you may live on the land and inherit the land asher Adonai Elohecha notein lach, which the Lord your God has given to you. Very, very strong words. So then we talked a little bit about what is Zionism about. Our Jewishness and what that means is being Jewish for ourselves. It's about what we came to create in Israel, a new Jew and a new type of Judaism. It's also about the test. Now that we have power, we have the land of Israel, how do we look back and help the other? Meaning, now that we are we've inherited the land from God, how do we look back and help those? How do we provide justice or give justice to those who are not Jewish, who are other? We're talking about Palestinians, all kinds of Jews, not just non-Jews, but Reform, Orthodox, Conservative, Reconstructionists, and so on and so forth, all kinds of Jews, women, members of the LGBTQIA community, transgender. So the point is that we have this land, Now, what do we do with the power? And I think that that is a tremendous statement for us to think about when it comes to being a Zionist. Is a Zionist only about living freely in a land for Jews living freely in their own land? Or is it also inclusive of justice for all people in that land? Something to think about. That is my podcast for this week. I wish you an early Shabbat Shalom.